Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to this talk on the physical impact of social interactions. My name's James. I'm going to be taking you through the talk. Should run to about 30 minutes only. It's not going to go on too long. If people do have questions, feel free to drop them in as we go, but we're low numbers again, so we might get through this pretty quickly. So a little bit about me. So my company here, Rewire Neurodynamics, is all around improving physical review. Just a little bit of my background. So I've kind of worked my way through all different kinds of movement throughout my life. I've really nerded out over it essentially. Started out as a musician, progressed on to gymnastics, slacklining, circus, juggling. That kind of then delved into the artistic expression side. So I got into things like theater and clowning. Worked for quite a while for the Guildhall School of Music and Drama to help teach the sort of integration between music, theater, circus, acrobatics, all of that cool stuff kind of joined together. Then ended up having quite a major facial surgery that got me interested in the brain and nervous system. So basically ended up with quite a bit of kind of nerve damage, sensory issues to my face. That had a knock-on effect to the rest of my body, and I wanted to discover, what have we discovered in neuroscience that actually changes what we used to think about the body and how we learn and develop. And that's pretty much where I am now. That's my business, is all about sweating the small stuff, whether it's through pain management, skill development. My goal is to try and find the little things that people are overlooking that are costing them greatly in terms of their results. So, where a sports coach might be looking at improving how high somebody can jump. You're trying to learn your front somersault, you can't jump high enough. They're going to look at explosive drills for the muscles. I'm going to look at, does the way that you breathe influence the way that you jump? Does the range of motion in your arms, the way that you swing your arms, does that actually limit the amount of power that you can generate? Does how often you blink or your glasses prescription have anything to do with how much force you can produce from your muscles? Things that are smaller than you might ever think were necessary, and just trying to incorporate all of those things into my practice. Finally got a little Rubik's Cube picture. That is currently the sport that I'm trying to excel at. So again, trying to put all these things into a field that doesn't really get a lot of research and attention. The things like gymnastics and stuff, there's a lot of sports science, sports theory about that. Very much not the case when it comes to Rubik's Cubes, dexterity, how fast your fingers can go. I kind of find all this stuff fascinating, and today, one of the things I really wanted to explore for a long time has been the physical impact of social interactions, because it's something that comes up time and time again when I'm working with athletes specifically. Is we think that just because we understand our own bodies, we understand how things are going to work. The strength exercises we do, the pain rehab exercises we do, but actually how we relate to other people plays a huge role in our physicality. Social interactions help to explain how we become the physical beings that we are, and the way that we physically engage in the world also influences the way that we can physically interact with the world. So I'm going to be sharing a few of the kind of key interesting details, the things that I find are the most fascinating, I guess. And then I'll talk about a few steps that you can do to train. I think the information is more interesting than the takeaway drills. I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by what I'm recommending people do. Get out there, socialize more, get off social media. All the usual stuff is coming, but what I am hoping is that maybe with the little introduction we get here, that you understand a bit better why we're choosing certain things, or why we're saying certain things are more important. So with that out of the way, let's first have a look at what is it people say social interactions actually can do for us. So we've got a list here of the kind of things you've probably heard yourself before. So your social interactions can help foster or develop your sense of identity. So it's not just interacting with others, it's actually building a more grounded version of you. It improves your mood. That's definitely not going to be surprising to people. Lowers your blood pressure, improves immune function, reduces inflammation. Again, why I wanted to talk about the physical side of social interactions is I find these things are really interesting and overlooked. You know, you can say, oh, cool, yeah, you should get out and socialize more because it's really good for your heart health, cardiovascular health. Cool, but why? Does that make sense? Is there an evolutionary reason that that's the case, or is it just this happy coincidence? So we're going to look at that. Increases your tolerance to pain. This is a really, really big one. This is quite a huge amount of the work that I do. You know, if you go see your physio or chiropractor or whoever, homeopathy, massage, no matter who you go to see, there's this huge placebo benefit to the work that they do before you get to any actual benefits from the work itself. So, you know, when you go to see your doctor, you book your GP appointment when you're sick, and once they give you the appointment, you just start getting better. There's nothing to say why that should happen. Obviously, the longer you have an illness, the more likely you are to get better anyway. But there's something about the care aspect when somebody else gets involved and kind of starts to share the load, even if it's not in a very meaningful way. We seem to have some kind of calming, relaxing effect. And in pain especially, it seems that this is really prominent. So the more social that we are, and the more that we're asking for help, which we'll look at, the less pain we seem to feel, which to me is pretty mind-blowing, and one that we definitely want to look further into. And then finally, decrease mortality. If you're more social, you're going to live longer. I don't think we need any more marketing for social interaction. Those are all pretty cool. So basically, what I want to do now is just divide it into three little categories of different things that might explain all of this stuff, that kind of explains why social interactions might actually be physically good for us. And the first thing that we're going to look at is a chemical which you may have heard of called oxytocin. So oxytocin, if you have heard of it, you might have heard of it as like a bonding hormone, a love hormone, romantic hormone. When it's used in kind of like pop science literature, it's usually associated with pair bonding. So, you know, a couple in a relationship, when they're using physical touch, something like that, they're going to be releasing oxytocin, which makes them feel closer together. They trust each other more. They're more on the same page with everything. You'll also hear it between parents and children, especially mother and child. Oxytocin is released during lots of different things, eye contact, breastfeeding, among others. And this really happens to like an extreme extent in the early stages of a child's life, and that strengthens like a really strong kind of maternal bond. Happens a little bit between male parents as well, but you hear about it more in the case of motherhood, just because of how strong that kind of chemical release is and how much it strengthens those bonds between each other. To say that oxytocin is just like a familial thing, like between family members, is a bit disingenuous, I think. It's actually, for any kind of social bonding, oxytocin is released to some extent, and basically what it's going to do for us is help us to learn social behaviors better. So when we are releasing oxytocin, there's a good chance the other person in the interaction will be as well. It sort of helps us become a bit more in sync with each other. That helps us to kind of trust each other. It also helps us to look for things that are the same between us, and it helps to look for the things that, you know, the things that we believe in, that we stand for, the things that we don't believe in, that we don't stand for. That's kind of the role of oxytocin. It's learning by finding all the similarities and pushing away all the differences, so that by the end of it, we've got a really strong sense of identity, or a sense of where we stand with this other person. So that makes a lot of sense with a couple or a mother and child. With your friends, though, as well, same thing's going on. You know that your friends like video games, but they don't like talking about politics. So in your group, that is something that's just going to get strengthened over time. People are going to bring up politics less, they're going to bring up video games more, and if there's other things, the wider the friendship group goes, the more your brain will start looking for these similar links between everybody and making sure that everybody kind of fits that those kind of criterias. So with oxytocin, you get this kind of cool thing that, you can build really good group bonds with each other, but for yourself, the other benefit to that is it actually helps to shape your own personality and beliefs. Because if you think about it, how many of your own thoughts are actually really your own? A lot of the time, we have some things that, are just unique to us. We like certain things, we don't like certain things. And the reason why could be genetics, could be how we've grown up with our senses. If somebody's hypersensitive to loud sounds, well, doesn't matter if you're in your video game group, if there's loud noises, you're probably still going to hate it, and you're not going to feel like that is something that you want to be part of your identity, and you'll probably try to steer the group as much as you can towards something that can get rid of the loud sound. So you play in somebody's house that isn't as noisy, or you play specific types of games, and you'll try to bring that to the group. But a lot of the time we find that our opinions actually are built up around the opinions of other people around us. We tend to adopt things if we're around people who all think in the same way or all act in the same way. It's much easier for us to just continue to act in the same way that they do. And over time, when we start physically acting in the same way as somebody else, we start coming up with the justifications for us to believe that that is the right thing to do, whether it was actually something that was ingrained in us from the beginning. So by bonding with somebody more strongly and more closely, we actually end up with a much stronger sense of individual identity as well, because we know what things we like. We also, anything where we weren't sure, we're on the fence, or you're like, I don't really, do I prefer this type of chocolate to this type of chocolate? I don't know, I don't care. It's a bit ambiguous. There's lots of different aspects of your life that are kind of in that gray zone of ambiguity, and when you're more strongly bonded to specific groups, it helps you kind of refine some of that stuff away. So, sometimes ambiguity is a good thing. Do you like this or this? Well, if it doesn't matter, then maybe I don't need to have a strong opinion or identity about it one way or the other. But if you eventually are going to have to make a decision or a choice, the more friendship groups you have bonded yourself to, the more likely that you'll be able to make those decisions because you said, yeah, actually, I feel this way about this because I'm part of this group and we all feel strongly about this, even if it's not something that I would have cared about otherwise. So because of that, then we end up with our own kind of stronger sense of our own identity, and this can actually improve things like mood, self-confidence, and kind of pro-social and positive behavior. So we're more likely to help each other out, we're more likely to kind of share things, we're more likely to deal with failure better if we have higher levels of oxytocin and stronger bonds between peers or just other people in general. The other thing to note, though, is that oxytocin can also work in a negative way as well, because all of the things that make you pair really well in a group has to be at the expense of creating a group to be distinct from other people. So oxytocin is actually what creates that like us versus them dynamic. When you pair really strongly with one type of person, so if you just have one really, really close friend, well, you probably find that all of that person's enemies have suddenly become your enemies and all your enemies have become their enemies, whether they've actually done anything to you or not. And I think part of the reason why we see so much of this kind of rigid social constructs and division between lots of different social groups nowadays is that the amount of sort of social groups that are appearing are just going up and up and up. We're getting more and more of these little clusters of groups, and because we're becoming more isolated and kind of lonely as a species, our brain is really, really craving these social bonds. So if we find any group that will accept us, our brain is going to go into overkill with this forming the pair bond, and it will try to latch us into whatever groups we can get ourselves into, which means, forming the sense of us and then also forming the sense of them. One of the easiest ways to remedy this is to integrate yourself into as many different types of groups as you possibly can. Again, like I said, the solutions I'm going to talk about here aren't anything groundbreaking. I'm hopefully more going to be explaining why things are the way they are. But the more different types of groups, if you can be involved in groups that, agree with all the things that you agree with, as well as be more involved with the groups that maybe don't necessarily agree as much, you don't have to be equally as active in each group that you're in, but the more different groups of people that you can experience, the more of their perspectives and thoughts and experience of how their groups works, the better that's going to be for you for not getting so kind of dug into one specific ideology. So that's oxytocin. That is more around the kind of mood, self-confidence, sense of identity, all of that. The next thing we're going to look at is what's going on with all this physical stuff. So we kind of said that social interactions are really good for reducing inflammation, changing our pain tolerance. We'll actually talk about that in the next slide. Changing our blood pressure, our immune function, that kind of thing. What's going on there? That feels like it shouldn't make sense, but the way that we've evolved as a species to be functioning better as a social unit than as a lone individual actually goes a long way to explaining why this is the case. So humans as a species, as I've said, they function better in groups. There are animals that are better when they're on their own, and usually the way that these animals are going to get by is having really good kind of reactions, really good ability to hide and avoid being seen. For humans, that's not us. We kind of stick out pretty well. So we kind of have this idea of safety in numbers. If we're in a big group, our survival chances go way up, because if a predator was to be hunting us, then, statistically, if it's just going to go for one, the larger the group, the less likely it is that that's going to be you. And then also you can work together because we've evolved really strong communication skills. We can also actually band together and annihilate that threat. So one of the reasons that people who are more social tend to live longer is nothing to do with the neuroscience or neurology of it. It's actually just down to the fact that because we evolved better to work in a big social group, we actually have evolved many more benefits. So, the more friends you have into your old age, the more likely you have people who are going to come in and check on you regularly. When you have a problem, something goes wrong, the more people you have available to talk to, the more likely one of those people is going to have a solution. So it's not actually anything to do with your biochemistry or anything like that. It's just statistically we can get help from many more sources. But there is also some interesting stuff in the neuroscience behind it as well. So any human that's on their own has a greater chance of being attacked, being singled out and targeted in a predatory attack. And they've also got a greater chance of being wounded in that attack. So say a tiger is hunting you down and they attack you. If they kill you, well, game's over anyway, so tough luck. But let's say they just managed to cut off your arm. The way your body needs to deal with a physical wound is by blocking it up and then sending lots of repair agents to kind of clean up the damage and patch you up. And this is what we call our inflammatory response. So the inflammation just kind of creates space in that area so that there's more room for all of the different white blood cells and platelets and all these things to come in and kind of do their job to create healing. And this inflammation is really, really useful in the short term, but actually in the long term, this is what's going to have major negative effects on things like our blood pressure, our heart health. Inflammation is really, really good for fixing an immediate problem, but it's not something that we want to have over and over again. The problem here is that once we've been attacked, so once the tiger's already got her arm off, it's already too late to be worrying about starting the inflammation process. If we know that we're in danger of something like this happening, then the brain wants to have this inflammatory response ready as soon as possible. So what tends to happen is anyone who spends more time alone, not engaged in social interactions, their brain has them already just primed for this inflammation response a lot quicker. It's basically going to say, anytime you hurt yourself, anytime anything goes wrong, I'm going to fire that inflammation response. I'm going to not take any chances just in case something big happens. I don't want things to get beyond my control at any point. So basically, isolated people who have less social interaction, have a much quicker and trigger-happy inflammation response, let's say. And this means that they benefit when, they get that knock or injury or something like that. Their body is able to fix and heal it, but they suffer through things like blood health and heart health because this response isn't healthy over a long period of time. The benefit that somebody who's isolated and alone has is that probably you're much less susceptible to diseases and viruses and things like that. So while the inflammatory response goes way up, the immune response goes way down, because most of our diseases are transmitted through other humans. A virus that adapts to one human is going to find it easier to get into your body and infect you. And if you're just not around that many humans, your chance of infection goes way down. So the brain is going to save some energy on the immune response. The problem is, again, because we've evolved to be more social creatures, the immune response doesn't necessarily cause as much damage most of the time than the inflammatory response is going to. And so what we find is people who are more social actually end up with a stronger immune response, because the brain says, hey, there's more stuff going around, there's more viruses going around, so we actually need to be ready for that at any time. And they actually benefit from a stronger immune system just off the back of the fact that this presents with a more evolutionary advantage. So when it comes to things like blood pressure, heart rate, immune function, social interactions actually serve to promote stronger immune function and reduce inflammation. Doesn't make it go away altogether. The inflammatory response is also present with the immune system as well, but it means that we're probably not going to have such a heightened response to it and a trigger-happy response to it as we would if we were spending more time on our own. Finally, then we're going to come to pain. So this for me is the most interesting one. I work a lot with pain management, and especially with chronic pain, and we've got other videos on this channel. If you search on the Rewire Guide, there are tips to self-manage your pain, which if you're going through chronic pain is really worth checking out. But what we're going to talk about here is just a really small subset of that, in the fact your social skills actually might influence your pain tolerance. And when we're wondering about this, the nerve that we want to look at is the facial nerve. Okay, so when you're in pain, one of the easiest ways you can communicate that is through your face. You've seen when somebody gets hurt, very often you can tell how bad it is by what reaction that person makes in their face. And this is part of our social evolutionary strategy. If we see somebody who's hurt, we automatically, instinctually kind of want to help them. And this is how our brains get by kind of major injuries and major upsets. If we get hurt and we have to sort the problem out ourselves, then we're going to need that inflammation response. We're going to need loads and loads of physical space for all the internal things to do the thing. We're also going to need a lot of pain to make sure we're not moving things that we shouldn't be. If there's loads of other people around who can do the work for us, well, we don't need necessarily as much of that inflammation response, because let's say instead of having more different fluids and tissues on the inside being manipulated, somebody can put like a nice cream on it and bandage things up and kind of make it feel nice from the outside. Well, that leaves less work that has to be done on the inside. If what was the second point? I have totally forgotten it. It'll come back to me. But yeah, when there are people around that can actually provide assistance and help, then we don't need the inflammation response. Oh yeah, and then we don't need the pain response either. So, you know, if you move your arm when everything's swollen up and inflamed, that's probably going to undo a lot of the work that the brain was doing in repairing all the tissues on the inside. Well, if people are doing half of that work from the outside, actually you can probably move it around quite a bit more. When you don't need to feel pain because you're being looked after. You're not necessarily going to have to recover super quick so you can run away again at the next sign of danger. There's other people who can kind of protect you and stand up for you. Then you don't need as much pain. You don't need pain to be as intense as somebody who is stuck on their own. So basically, the more social we are, the more we're interacting with people, the higher our tolerance to pain goes, because we can actually rely on other people for help. The reason I've put the facial nerve in on this slide is that sometimes it's not always the case. This kind of like pain face or pain reaction that we have isn't necessarily an ingrained thing. People learn it. So, you know, when you see different kids in a playground, one of them falls over and the parents go, "Oh my God, are you okay? Be careful, be careful, you have to be careful." Very likely that kid's going to start crying, and that kid's going to go into a more protective kind of mode. If you see another kid fall over and the parents just kind of laugh and go, "All right, get up, let's see, yeah, you're fine, cool, off you go," that kid's going to learn to respond to injury and pain in a different way. Similarly, when we hurt ourselves and we make a pain face and somebody responds to that in a positive way and actually helps us out in the way that we need, our brain's going to remember that, this pain face is actually useful for getting help from other people. That unfortunately doesn't happen to everybody. So some people, they'll make the pain face and their parents or caregivers or anyone who's around is going to ignore them, or maybe sometimes even something worse. Well, then that person's going to learn that it doesn't really matter what kind of expression you make on the outside, you need to worry about what's going on the inside. So when the expression of pain, whether it's from your face, whether it's from your words, whether it's from your body language, doesn't produce help from the outside, usually people are going to unlearn that as a skill. Then they're going to get hurt. They're probably not going to show it as well on the outside, and then they're less likely to get help, which then means their tolerance to pain is going to go way, way down, because again, the brain feels like you've just been left on your own to deal with this problem. We can't rely on other people to help us out. So that's kind of why the facial nerve, I think, is a really important one to look at there. But as a kind of general principle, if we want to improve our tolerance to pain, number one, just being more social actually can make our pain response go down, or tolerance to pain go way up, so we don't feel it as much. Number two, we can work on actual communication skills. So facial expression is going to be really, really useful, and this is one of the reasons why interactions that are in person over online are actually much more useful than online interactions, especially online faceless interactions, because a lot of the kind of information that we transmit to people around whether or not we need assistance or help or how we need to be treated actually comes from the face and body language. There'll be a little bit with tone of voice and things like that, but the face is going to be really important there. Things that we can do, practicing facial expressions, practicing different types of communication can be really helpful. Maybe even just practicing the general ability of the face to move. So I've mentioned I had quite major facial surgery that really affected my ability to be expressive. Sometimes it affects my ability to kind of speak well and things like that. By doing things like, face yoga, where, you're not practicing specific expressions, you're just stretching the face out and making kind of specific shapes and things like that. If we improve the potential of the face to kind of move, then it increases the chances we can get it to create the kind of reactions and the responses that we want it to later on. Outside of the facial side of things, even on the expression side of things, actually something as simple as asking people for help. When I'm working with people with chronic pain, one of the biggest things that I encourage them to do is to ask for help for things that aren't even related to their pain. So we hear a lot in terms of mental health advice. It's okay to reach out and ask for help or ask to speak to somebody, but actually, because of the previous stigmas or people's worries about that, it can be really hard to say, I feel like I need help for my condition, especially if it's something that you've had for a long time. The guilt kind of piles up for a lot of people of, how many more times can I actually ask for help about the same thing before people just get fed up of me asking. But it turns out with the research into social interactions, you might not even need to ask for help about that specifically. Something as simple as like, hey, pass the salt. Can you remind me to do this in 10 minutes? Choosing things that are like totally meaningless, that don't require a whole lot of effort from the other person, but that just help to reinforce to your brain that you're not doing things completely on your own, actually can go a long way to increasing our pain tolerance. So when we're experiencing high levels of pain and things like that, one of the best things that we can do is just start asking for little things, tiny favors, and that can actually go a long way to seeing good results. So, as I said, the information I'm hoping was kind of interesting. The sort of how-tos or the things to put into practice, I don't think any of this is going to be massively surprising to people. So number one, integrate with as many social groups as possible. We sort of explained why. I mean, this one, you don't really have to do. This is more like a general, this would probably be better for the world if more people could get as many different people's perspectives as possible. If you don't integrate with loads of groups, you might actually find you can build a stronger sense of self-identity. So if you're somebody who's really lacking in confidence or purpose or something like that, you actually might find that that's the wrong advice and you want to just stick with one group of people and kind of like build up all of your traits first before you start looking into others. But in general, when we have too much time with just one type of people, we build a much stronger kind of us and them, while that fosters more sense of self-identity and confidence and purpose and things like that. Also leads to more kind of biases and actually tends to have a greater chance of aggression and like strong negative attitudes towards other types of people or groups of people. So at some point we probably want to be moving into as many different areas as we possibly can. The second one is to foster individual connections as often as possible. So when we're getting into lots of different social groups, we might not necessarily need to be getting to know every single person in that group on an individual level, but individual connections are going to be really important when it comes to that oxytocin, and the more of the oxytocin we can have release and the more different people we can be interacting with, the more we're going to see things like inflammation drop, blood pressure drop, immune function go up. Prioritize real-world situations over online. Again, nothing wrong necessarily with online communication, but again, no surprise, people find that in-person communication is always better, and that does seem to be that our brain actually values stuff like the facial expression, the body language, all of those things. While they aren't essential, they actually build a much clearer and whole picture of what's going on, and that can have benefits to the other person, but also back to us, because what we receive from the other person is going to be better as well. Next one, ask for help. So what we just talked about doesn't need to be asked for help with the big stuff. I mean, that's going to be great when it comes to like living longer. The people who have more connections, more people that they can ask for help with, are going to benefit much, much more. but asking for help for little small things actually can help to really lower stress, increase pain tolerance, and whatnot. And finally, consider examining facial expression and body language. This one, some people can get a little upset or triggered over. As I said, facial expressions and emotional expressions, we always think of those as like just innate things. If somebody looks sad, that means that they are sad. It turns out that doesn't seem to be the case. While for a long time we did think that there were universal facial expressions that were just innate and hardwired into the brain, it doesn't seem that that is the case. It seems like newer research and information is starting to contradict that and suggest that actually different people will have different emotional signatures and different ways that they express those emotions. Working on how you express things can actually yield really good results for you in your kind of long-term development, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to adopt a standard facial expression for a certain thing. It's more about learning how to be effective at communicating facial expressions, body language, things like that. The goal is to be understood, not to be conforming to like a specific pattern or something like that. If that's something that interests you, that's something we could potentially talk about a little bit further. But for the talk, that's basically it. So I hope some of that was useful. If you would like to explore any of this further, you can find our sort of socials here. So we got Instagram, YouTube. Please do feel free to visit my website. We have some products that you can buy if you want to learn about movement from the point of view of the brain. If you'd like to potentially book a consultation or something like that, you can also email me and we can chat through some of this stuff in more detail or anything else as well. So that's it from me. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you at another webinar.